preparing to live stream. And who can guess what city is behind me on the picture? Of those who didn't hear, write in the chat while we are waiting the YouTube. And we are live. So over to Anna.
Hello, everyone. Please excuse us. We've had some minor technical issues. So hello and welcome. I'm Anna. I'm your host today on behalf of Product People. We are a German-based consultancy and we help companies efficiently develop great products. Like in all our meetings, we have a guest who will talk to us about an exciting topic from the product management world. And this talk will be followed by a Q&A session and a friendly networking event on Zoom, to which we invite everyone. So today we have the pleasure of learning more about replatforming from our guest, Daniel Pardes, VP of Product at Meetup. So Daniel, thank you very much for joining us today. We are all big Meetup fans. Actually so big that we have a community of over 3,600 members on Meetup. And this is just one of the reasons we are very much looking forward to your presentation. So please, you have the stage.
Thank you so much. Here, I'll share my screen so y'all can see. First of all, thank you so much for having me, for the product people, for inviting me. I am Dan. I'm the head of product for Meetup, and I've been working for Meetup for a little over 18 months. In my current role, I've only been in it for about 6 months, since shortly after Meetup was acquired by LA Corp. For those who didn't know, Meetup used to be owned by WeWork. We are no longer owned by WeWork. That's a good thing at the moment, and I'm really, really happy for where we are. Maybe more importantly, I've been using Meetup for about 10 years, and I've been an organizer on Meetup for a little bit over a year. So I also really like the product, and I'm excited to be able to help make it better in my day job. I'm here to share some of what I've learned in my career as a product leader, and especially now at Meetup about replatforming. It's a topic that doesn't, I think, get covered a lot, so I'm really excited to dig in and especially for your questions. So let me see if I can go to the next slide. All right. Before getting too far in, I wanted to talk about what a platform is, just so we have the same definition. So in my book, the platform that we're working on it's the foundation. It's the stuff that is like under the things you're doing. It's what allows developers to create the code. Sometimes it's actually where the code lives. When you talk about the tech stack or the software that's written to allow the product to function on it, that's your platform. I think of it a lot like the operating system for your product and likely for your business also if you're a product company. So to go one further, so what's replatforming, right? It just follows that this is replacing that foundational layer. It's replacing or severely upgrading the operating system that's underpinning your product or your business. Now, we are product people. As a product person, I find that many product people like a good analogy. So one analogy that gets used often is renovating a house. And I think there's similarities, but I just wanted to point out why I haven't found the perfect analogy for replatforming in software. Houses, by definition, have a foundation, but it's not often that when you renovate a house, you actually go in to replace the foundation. Usually when you buy a house or an apartment and you need to fix it, you update essentially the facade. Even if you take everything away all the way down to the studs, to the beams in the wall, you very rarely actually replace what's underneath the house. And if you do, you get an expert who's done it many, many times before and who probably practiced many times before they were even allowed to do it. And that's the thing with software, even at this date and age, is it hasn't been around that long. And there's still a lot of uniqueness that isn't true in houses. There's only so many ways to build a house and a foundation for a house. I've seen houses that are several hundred years old or sometimes 1,000 years old, and they have a stone structure at the bottom that holds them up. Not a whole lot has changed. The technology's changed, but foundations serve the same purpose. Products and software have been moving so quickly I think there's a lot of variables, and we haven't come to that same ubiquitous understanding of a foundation. So it's just hard to do this. This picture is from a movie, which I realize if you weren't born and raised in the US may not be something that you recognize off the top of your head, but if you do, please put it in chat. I'm really curious if anyone else knows what this is. If you don't worry, but if you do, I'll figure out how to give you a prize via Zoom. So replatforming, one of the main points of my talk is it's really hard. I think it can become really complicated very quickly. And after doing several of these, I kind of wanted to share what I think the big three reasons are, because it's clarifying, or it was clarifying for me to really understand those things. So by definition, the platform is the backbone on which a large part of your business is running. So messing with it is inherently risky, and it's usually quite expensive. It's something that is everyone depends upon every day in order to get the revenue you need to sustain your business. And so it just is risky to touch that. The second thing is platforms tend to have a relatively long life cycle. Most places I've gone, if the company's been around for a few years, their platform is that old. So many platforms are 5 years or older. At Meetup, we've been around for 18 years. And our platform, there are pieces of the code that are, over a decade old, or a decade old. In some cases on our native apps, we have code from before, from initial versions of iOS or initial versions of when Android came out. We have really old code running there. And this in general usually means that by the time you need to replace your platform, few, if anybody at your company is from the original team. And even if they are, at the point you need to replace it, it's unlikely any one person understands the entire thing in detail. And there's probably no consolidated picture of your platform. It's hard to put your hands around it. And then because of that longevity, most platforms, evolve to get to their current point. So that means they have the legacy of all those edge case bug fixes of your previous business model, your pricing changes, all the small pivots that your business made that your product team so carefully steered you through over time. They're all built into your platform. And that's the scar tissue that I'm referring to, right? You get hurt and your body heals, you've moved forward, but it's not the same. And there's a legacy of that old stuff there. And those last two, that really long life cycle and that scar tissue, that's what makes replatforms hard and painful, is that those two complicated things combined with the fact that most people haven't done this often or many times in their career means that you don't have a lot of expertise to go on. I've been a part of 8 replatforms in my nearly 20 years of working in software. In my experience, that's actually above average. The only reason I have done so many or been a part of so many is because I was a consultant for 5.5 years. So I saw more than normal because I worked on multiple at the same time and I worked with many companies. So just to share, Meetup is affected by all the things in the hard list, as well as that lack of experience from people who've been here for a long time. So I think it's important to say, okay, it's really hard and it's really dangerous. So why would anyone in the right mind do it? I think one thing that someone pointed out to me this morning was operating systems get upgraded. It must be worth the cost. It's really hard and complicated, but it's worth it, right? At some point, Apple decided to make OS X. Windows decided to do a complete rewrite several times. Operating systems get complete rewrites. Why do they do that? I think, and people build new houses and they replace old ones. These hard things get done. So not to be too broad, but something has to change for you to need to do this. And I break this down into like the forces at play. There's internal forces and external forces. So just a few examples. From an external force, things change. My current example, a pandemic. That hasn't happened before in my life, but that changed a lot of user behavior. I am spending significantly more time in Zoom. For Meetup, many fewer people are meeting up in person, right? The world has changed. We have to address that as a product. That's a big change for us. And other market behaviors can change. I think a market change example, Apple just announced it's offering a subscription that bundles a bunch of services together, and that has a price. And that price is maybe lower than we would have thought. And so our service, maybe our pricing has to change to adjust it. Maybe the way we price our service has to adjust to deal with that market force. Examples of internal things, if your business goals shift, Meetup was just acquired. That's a reason why internal goals shift quite dramatically. And sometimes your talent isn't as skilled in the languages or construct of the old system. Like literally, you don't have the expertise to maintain the old thing. So you actually need to replatform to be able to survive moving forward. Overall, I think it just comes down to you do it because it's worth the risk. You do hard things because the payoff is so much more than that risk and that effort. And it's worth understanding that. So I want to go through some examples and talk about what Meetup's doing so you can understand, like, how do you know it's worth it? And really, how do you think about it to make that risk as small or as manageable as possible? So some oldish examples. I don't know how many folks here were around and working in software when these things happen. So forgive me if I'm just repeating what you lived through, but hopefully this will be somewhat enlightening. Netscape and BaseCamp. At the beginning of 1998, Netscape 4.0 was the biggest browser out there. They were charging $50 per license. And this is when software came in a box that they put shrink wrap on, and then you went to a store and you bought it. So this is like a while ago. But Internet Explorer, Microsoft was giving away Internet Explorer for free and shipping it with Windows. So you can see on this little graph of browser share that going into 1998, Netscape was rapidly losing market share to the free alternative. And around that time, they announced that one of their strategies was version 5 is going to be free and it's going to be open source. They created the Mozilla Foundation or partnered with Mozilla. These were both unheard of. It was going to be free. That's amazing. And the open source thing was totally unheard of at that point. No one had really done that. But in opening it up to the world to contributors, they couldn't gain traction with developers. And they were having problems doing what they had planned to do without outside development, contribution, and the company wasn't moving the way that they thought it was going to. The learning curve was just too steep on their existing stack. And one of the quotes from one of the lead engineers was it was too old and crufty for people to really get into. So after about a year, they decided to stop working on that version, and they were just going to do a complete rewrite. They were going to make version 6.0 awesome, amazing. That blue arrow on the graph, the blue arrow is a point in time when they said, we're now going to rewrite. And if you look at this, you can see that they already kind of started to lose the market at that point. It had been like almost a year when they started doing this since they started, and they hadn't moved the product at all. And it would be 2 more years before they actually finished the rewrite. So in total, it was almost 3 years where they lost the feature race against IE. By the time they were done, Internet Explorer had almost 90% of the users. So their rewritten version, even if it had been the most amazing thing, they'd lost most of the market. And that rewritten version actually wasn't that fantastic. And starting from scratch, they had lost a lot of that knowledge and the advantage they had before. So their new software wasn't probably good enough to live up to it. But in addition, it was just way too late. I think there's 2 big lessons to take from the Netscape example, which is they stood still as a product for several years. In order to replatform, they did not deliver new user value. Users were still using version 4, and a better thing was on the market. Internet Explorer was both free and arguably better at that point. So not delivering user value, incredibly dangerous for any amount of time. And then the second thing is that they didn't confirm that they're getting what they set out to get. They wanted a better, faster developer experience, but they didn't actually check that they were getting that. They weren't getting more people to work on the platform. They weren't shipping a faster code base that they could then ship new features on. They just kept putting more and more and more into the same rewrite without checking that they were actually getting the value. Now, BaseCamp. This company called 37 Signals, which is founded by Jason Fried and DHH, showed up as a web design firm in, I think, 2003-ish, but the early 2000s, the first time I saw them. I am putting, oh my gosh, somebody got the money pit. Wow. Great job. I'm very, very, very impressed. That was the answer to that house. Anna Maria, that's impressive. I just put a link in the chat. That's why I know. Oops, I did not. I put a link to one person in the chat. I apologize. Here's a link in our chat, but if you don't know about BaseCamp, go to basecamp.com/about/story. It's their history, and it's really interesting to read just as a company. They built this product to do project management for themselves, and then they released it to the world. It was called BaseCamp, and it was $50 a month. I, at that point, was a subscriber almost immediately. Software as a service was new. Paying a subscription fee and getting something was really cool. And it was such a, at that time, wonderfully simple user experience and focused on team communication. It was great. I was one of like 500,000 people who helped make BaseCamp a success. And And the founders began to realize that some internal things were shifting. Those forces, the external thing, they were doing great. The market loved their product, they were making money, but internally, they weren't excited by it as much anymore. They were having problems using their own product. They wanted to move forward. And they had this term, they called it the golden handcuffs. Their current customers didn't want the thing they wanted to build yet. They liked the product they had. And so they felt constrained by their current customers. So they started a rewrite because they wanted to make something new and different. The problem was actually the barrier was their current customers, but their future customers, they thought they could build something better for, and they couldn't build it in their existing software. So they did two really interesting things. One, they didn't try to build the same product again. They just built a different product. They wanted to solve many of the same problems, fulfill many of the same jobs to be done, but with different solutions. And that served them well in two separate ways. The first was they could decide which features from the previous thing to cherry pick and put in the new product. And that would let them decide if a feature in the old thing no longer made sense because an external force, the market had changed or their users had changed, they could adjust to it. They didn't have to worry about their current users, but for new people, they could adjust. And the second awesome advantage was their employees were really motivated by building a new product. 37 Signals was continuing to innovate in project management and product management with this new product. It wasn't just rebuilding something. And then the second big move they did is BaseCamp did not sunset the original product. BaseCamp 2 was a completely new product, and it was not backwards compatible. It had all of the new stuff. It was missing some old features. They changed some stuff, but BaseCamp 2 wasn't BaseCamp 1 slightly moved forward. It was a different product that shared the same ethos and shared some features. You could upgrade from BaseCamp Classic to 2, but you couldn't go backwards down from 2 to 1. And they're kind of famous for this, which is they kept the old solution. BaseCamp is actually still alive. They've done this again. BaseCamp 3 exists, as does 2, as does Classic. And it's a really interesting model. So this is my aside. Outside of my talk, this is just Dan. In doing research for this talk, I re-looked at BaseCamp. And one thing that I found was a video from, I think, 2015 of DHH talking about the rewrite and what they were doing. And I'm pasting a link again in the chat, but if you go look up BaseCamp and a DHH talk from 2015, you'll probably end up finding this. I encourage you to watch it. I watched it last week and I passed it along to my product leadership team this week. There's some really great points and lessons learned that can really only be spoken by the person who went through it. And there's this incredibly it's really fascinating to think about moving a product forward without having to lose your existing base. And it's really wonderful to hear it sort of straight from the horse's mouth. So I encourage you to watch it. Oops, that was the wrong slide. I want to talk, the two big lessons from a BaseCamp perspective is the existing product is doing a good job at something. I think it's easy to forget that, especially when you're in a company. You start to feel like it's just failing and it's so hard and I've got to rewrite it because I can't blah, blah, blah. But if you're making money still, if it's still working for your current business, it's important to remember the existing product is doing a good job at something. And you don't have to, BaseCamp said, you don't have to upset that apple cart in order to build a new one. So that's one huge lesson for me from that is you don't have to take apart the old thing to build the new, better thing. And the other second big lesson was the new thing doesn't have to be the same as the old. They were able to leave the old thing still getting some new features, delivering value to customers, and then the new thing could really move forward. So in case you think those two examples are isolated or too old or it won't happen again just like that, I will not go into as much detail, but just quickly, HipChat, which I don't know how many of you use, but was a great team collaboration chat platform. I used it for quite a while. They were doing great and owned a lot of the market share. A newcomer called Slack was just starting to get its legs. And HipChat decided to do a complete rewrite because it was too hard. They were having some reliability issues and it was too hard for them to move the features forward the way they wanted. They decided to do a rewrite. And just like Netscape, they didn't really ship any user-facing features for just a really long time, well over a year, it might be more than that. Meanwhile, Slack became a little bit bigger and completely gobbled up HipChat's market share. HipChat is not a thing anymore, so we can see where that ended, much like Netscape is not. And then a second sort of success story from a different position, Microsoft's Visual Studio was what I used as a computer science major in school. It was just the only IDE at that point, really, specifically on Windows, but it was one of the only good ones. But it got old and crufty, and from a user standpoint wasn't great. Microsoft realized that and said, let's create something totally new. And like BaseCamp, they just built a new product that was better. It didn't have all the old features, and they didn't worry about moving people to it. They just built something great. And it is still, I use it actually now as my IDE. So it's a current product, and they're kind of back at the table as one of the like cool kids in software development. So what's all of this to do with Meetup? Just in full transparency, Meetup has some of these things. We have huge historical engineering challenges. Tests are difficult to load. It's unclear who owns what part of the code base. It's big, it's old. We don't necessarily have people who are experts in all the things that we've got in there. There are some architectural patterns which are hard to support, don't often work. And we've made previous attempts at incrementally paying this down, or even 2 big bets to get out of pieces of this platform. But those 2 big things have largely failed because unfortunately, both of those efforts have required tweaking the same backend that has the issues that have plagued us before. And so for us, the internal thing was some of the talent. We don't have the people who are as adept at the older systems we've got, and we're unable to move our cycle time on building new features is way too long, and it's way too risky to touch the old thing. That's not enough. We have learned from Netscape and HipChat and all the examples I gave. So our developer experience and our reliability is one thing, but we didn't want to stall the product motion, going forward. There's more. The feature itself, the product itself, has really deep levels of product debt. If you've used it, you've probably bounced into some pages that look like they haven't been updated in 10 years. They might not have been. There's visual scar tissue. There's bugs that linger now that have been there for years and years and years. And the reason Meetup hasn't fixed them isn't because we don't want to or we haven't tried. Some of them are not intractable, but close. So part of the reason for us to approach a rewrite is we want to ship great features to our users. We're actually not able to in some cases. And the market is demanding more of us, and the market's moved. We have a photo sharing thing on Meetup that we maintain and we build. But most of you probably don't share photos with your friends through Meetup. You probably have an iCloud account, a Dropbox account, Google Photos, you have social media. We probably don't need a photo sharing feature in Meetup. So we don't have to build the same thing again, but we need a way to do that for our customers. And for us, that's what the replatforming is about. And then just one more thing, which is that Meetup is different than the other replatforms I've done because we're a marketplace. So I didn't realize this early enough, but if you're approaching a marketplace replatform, just really think about your marketplace. For us, it's multiple products. I have a product for organizers. I have a product for members, a supply and demand side product. They're actually different. And we're not approaching the replatform the same way. We're trying to actually approach the organizer, the supply side product, a lot more like BaseCamp. I'm going to build you something new and better that isn't exactly one for one, but is moving forward. The old thing can keep existing. At some point, we might want to move people away from it, but our goal isn't to kick everyone off the old thing. It's to give people a better choice. On the consumer side, when you come find events and things, we need to fix some of the underlying actual technical debt and the product debt that stops us from being to, how do I make search better? Well, when search is built on a technology that no one knows how to maintain or move forward, it's a problem. We do need to actually replatform our search. So it's trying to take smaller chunks of it and move it over. And then mixing that better, fixing product debt and technical debt together is really what led us to saying we're at the point of a replatform. So quick lesson so far. We're in the middle of this, by the way, so these might change, but we're trying to learn from what I talked about, which is, I think first, we're trying to keep the goals super clear. Don't replatform or change something just because there's the promise of payoff. Be as sure as possible, as quickly as possible, there's actually a payoff. Don't, like Netscape, wait 2 years of writing software to find out you don't have more developers helping. Second, when you open the whole thing up, there are just so many dependencies. You're touching what underlies your business. That means it has to span everybody in the business. So make sure you have a really good cross-functional leadership team in place or set up to succeed. Without our group of product and engineering leaders meeting multiple times a week to talk through this stuff, I really think we would already be on our backs and failing. The other thing we've learned from this is project management is really, really important. And that is a part of product managers' jobs often. But in this case, I really think it's worth thinking about, and we are right now. Do we get dedicated program managers and project managers in here to help? There are many dependencies and many milestones to meet. and meeting them is really important because you're going to hurt the customer ultimately if you can't deliver on these things. And it's hard to track that and focus on creating a great product at the same time. When you run to a place where you need to move the technical stuff and you have product features you want to develop, do the technical stuff first. The promise of a replatform is often I can ship features that are better, faster, it's more fun to build them, whatever. That's the goal. But if the first step to get there is get it onto a new stack, get it into a language people can currently work in, get the test to run, deploy, whatever, take care of that homework first. When you combine changing the features and the technical replatform, it's a dangerous rabbit hole that we have fallen into and learned from and are trying to avoid where it's possible. And then I said this before, but we have multiple products. So really try to think about them separately. And whether you're actually replatforming or building a new product or doing some mix of the two, just be really clear. The goal, again, is to get stuff to your consumers as fast as you can. Prove the value to your developers, your outside customers. Make sure you're delivering value. The last lesson on here is a tough one because we haven't really learned it yet. So just beware. We are trying to check our decisions often, but without reopening them. That's part of that leadership team. If you reopen every decision and relitigate it, you can get stuck in a tar pit. You're never going to move forward. It's like team spin or churn. It's very painful. But asking the question of, let's review why we decided this and make sure that those things still hold true is really important. And doing that often is really important. Just, it's not exactly how I thought it would be when we started, but being able to be honest and talk with the other leaders and communicate with the teams and adjusting is what I think is pulling us through this, even when it's tough. So how did it go? I don't know, we're still doing it. If you want to know more about it, keep using Meetup. Honestly, I think the changes are starting to actually become apparent to customers now. I think they'll become way more apparent in the next 3 or 4 months. We're trying to move quite quickly. And in most cases, it's going pretty fast. In the chat on Zoom is my email address. If you want to email me, go right ahead. Feel free to email me with your product gripes for Meetup as well. It's fine. I answer all the emails. It sometimes takes a day or two. And mostly, if you want to be a part of this amazing journey, and it is amazing, it is very challenging, but it's very rewarding. We're hiring product managers, designers, and engineers. Feel free to check out our site. Come join us on that. I really appreciate you letting me talk about what we're doing. It's very useful for us internally, and I hope it's useful for you. I'm happy to answer questions, and thank you to product people for letting me try this out on y'all.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And thank you for bringing light into such a complex task like as replatforming. So everyone, you are welcome to ask questions, either verbally, please, or you can post them in the Zoom chat. You're also welcome to post them on YouTube, and we will transfer them and ask them to Daniel.
I think there's already one.
Yeah, so I can answer the one that's in the chat. I was just reading it from Zishan. Sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Feel free to pop in and correct me. So I was in a very lucky spot. Our leadership team was somewhat predisposed to be supportive because beyond the metrics, they'd actually felt the pain already. Like they'd witnessed the problem. The actual metrics that got them there was understanding the cycle time it took to get an idea to our customers and see benefit back from it. That was, for us, one of the biggest things was we all have a shared understanding of where the product is falling short. We have ideas for how to change that. We've confirmed we have talented people who have track records that prove they have been able to deliver this type of functionality and value to customers before. And yet, when we put a team of them together and try to do this thing, it takes an inordinate amount of time. And it often is compromised by the time it comes out. And then when we dug into like the why with them, it was very clear that it had happened multiple times and they could see that pattern. So one big piece was them understanding that the cycle time, but also the reasons why. And part of that for us, the metrics were like looking at our retrospectives and being able to show them root cause analysis of some things. That's one thing. The other, from a technical perspective, another thing that did shift their thinking was the multiple architectures and backends, essentially. They're not free to run. Things are cheaper in the cloud, right? But we had lots of stuff that we don't need. And that cost was very real in dollars. You know, they could see that. Another one from our perspective was trust and safety. Continuing to be a good citizen of the internet has become harder. Right now with the election going on in the US, I think every company like Meetup, those bigger and smaller, are dealing with lots of attacks and brazen interference from people who want to influence other people. Being able to do that responsibly and run a great platform that is safe for our users is getting harder and more expensive. And then I think finally, the market's shifting. What people want out of a community platform and a place to go find other people around interests and the passions in their lives is changing. And our management fully believes in where we want to go and how to take it there, and sort of know the barriers to that. So it's a mix of like hard dollars, it costs too much, knowing we have talented people who are not able to get what we want to get done on the current thing. And then, you know, like I said, our wonderful leaders are actually predisposed because of their history and what they've seen. So it was a little easier in this case. Yeah, exactly. You mentioned time to market. That's what the cycle time is exactly that. It's the time from idea to customer value, which is just, it's like way too long. The other thing, by the way, is like even just inside that cycle time was the idea to, the return we would see on the things wasn't as great because of the sacrifices we had to make in the product development cycle to sort of bow to the current constraints of the platform. And that's usually product debt, not technical. When you have 40 states of an event page, it is hard to map a 45th state. And so you make concessions and those aren't great. Richard asked a great question about incrementally replacing the product. So I didn't exactly dive into this, but it's part of the Netscape thing. It's part of BaseCamp too, actually. You notice they did like big bang approaches. They built a new thing and then they like launched it upon the world. My belief is that the answer is no. I have successfully helped two companies, quote unquote, replatform incrementally. It is very difficult and it depends a lot on the product and the business specifically. I showed the money pit, the house. Another picture I had that I eliminated, but is another analogy people like, is like, it's like flying an airplane and rebuilding it at the same time. All those analogies fail because, at least for me, it's not like that. Or if it is, I have to be more careful about it. It's still building a new airplane unless you're careful. So what I mean is, like in Meetup world, my organizer new product is wonderful, but unless I'm able to deliver consumers to my organizers using that new product, it doesn't matter. The advantage Meetup has, or an existing thing has when you go to replatform, is like, how is your current flywheel turning? You can't break your product's flywheel in order to replatform. If the only way to change out pieces of your flywheel is by replacing the entire thing, I guess the answer is big bang, but keep trying to investigate it. If you're able to replace one part of the flywheel, which is what we're attempting to do, there's one loop that is like how organizers get stuff done, and one loop about how people who come to Meetup become organizers. We're trying to replace pieces of those. So my answer is, I think you can do incremental. Each of those increments for us is a little bit more of a product big bang. Technically, we are replacing systems more incrementally. You know, you can add test coverage, you can move platforms, you can host it in different places. So it's a mix, but the answer is it's real hard. I think that's the fun part about being a product person in replatform. Sorry, that was a little wandering, but. Oh, okay, cool. There's a question specifically from YouTube about how do you calculate the revenue of a search replatforming? This is Soren's a learning platform subscription base, and our search is a secondary way of navigation is outdated. So we're actually very, I think, similar in this respect. Our search is outdated as a product finding method in and of itself. Calculating the revenue has been difficult because our current users know that search is terrible, so they don't use it. And the second big thing is our current product doesn't actually encourage users to use the product like Meetup itself, not just with search, but to come to Meetup to find the stuff they want. Most of you, if you're in here through the Meetup, you probably got an email or several or a push notification telling you about this. One of the biggest ways Meetup gets people to things or to know about stuff is notifications. It's nudges. It's not by saying, go to the product and look around. So why that's a problem is the initial revenue for search replatforming is small, because if I just take the current people and help them convert at a higher rate, even if it's a much higher rate, that's not that many people. I have to do two things. One, I have to make the thing itself better and cheaper for us to get better at. So in one way, I'm reducing the cost of maintaining the system, and on the other way, I'm increasing the revenue, the conversion from it. And then the next thing I have to do is I have to give more people the option to use the better search, and I have to build trust in the better search. And that part's tough. We do have metrics around how we're trying to grow the number of people searching. In 2021, a lot of what we're going to be focused on is helping people use the better tools we're creating. Because as I mentioned, like, it doesn't matter if you release a new replatform thing if nobody's there. So we're hopefully not going to stall, kind of like Netscape did for 2 years. We're replacing pieces that happen faster. Search is on its way right now. In a few weeks, actually, everybody who's searching on Meetup will be on a new platform. And as we have that data and grow it, we can show the revenue from search growing as we increase. As soon as we see that relationship, right? Product management, I've always joked, is like it's cause and effect. If I can prove cause and effect, I can print you money. And so we're in the middle of showing them the effect. We've shown them that if we make search better, more people convert, and that makes us more money. And now we're showing them the effect of if we put more people into that better experience, you also see that that graph go up. And so that's the two pieces of like, here's how search gets better. It takes a while. We have a lot of patience and wonderful leaders who understand that and have done this before and are like, we get it, make it better, get it to industry standards, be able to modify it, have staff who are amazing at using the tools, and then we're sure you'll see growth. But even then, I'm still helping them see that growth trajectory. And like from a, running a good business perspective, we have to be able to predict it a little. I hope that helps. Sorry, just reading in the chat window. Okay, so the question is, from Abdin, is how much did data, user-generated content and feedback inform the decisions around refactoring the platform? And are there any specific examples? So that's, yes, sure. The reason we actually decided in many ways to approach the organizer, quote unquote, replatform, the organizer product differently, is because we actually have a lot of really great feedback from years. Meetup has been a wonderful place that has been doing user research for quite a while. I think we've underutilized all the amazing insights our user research team has given us over time, and I hope we're finally catching up. We have a lot of feedback directly from organizers specifically about how Meetup is succeeding and failing. And there were some really stark patterns about what they were asking for universally in some cases, and things that weren't working universally that were broken for them. So the answer is a lot. When we went to refactor some of the organizer tools, we decided to build a new product for organizers because we couldn't do the thing that current people knew they needed and that we were seeing the market demand of Meetup. So one example is being able to, this is so simple, it's kind of ridiculous, but like format your event descriptions, add bold, italic, links, images, emoji, etc. Obviously, any modern platform should have that. Meetup on its current classic platform does not. It does as we're rewriting it. That's a big deal for organizers to be able to present their information the way that makes sense for their members. Talking to them about what they needed made it clear that it wasn't just, and the research we'd done with users and organizers, it wasn't just that they needed to be able to make something bold. What they wanted was a way to make their events more appealing, clearer, easier to create. And so we chose to build a different type of product for creating those things because it allowed us to give them what both they wanted, which was an easier way to do it and a cleaner way to show it to people, and more people coming to their events by offering what people at the events needed. And it wasn't easy. In fact, we tried to change it on the existing platform several times, and that cycle time was like totally bonkers. It took months to do simple things. So that's part of it. The other big thing is that we get complaints from users on a myriad of things. Thankfully, it's a nice, decent sized community on Meetup. So a sheer number isn't an indication, but we see these patterns that like, this thing isn't working the way people expect. People don't get the message delivered they expect to, or the announcement for their event isn't working the way that they would like it to, or getting them the number of RSVPs they want. And so hearing that and understanding why is more of a technical, it's the way we've written the software. It's not because of the technology, it's product. We designed something that is no longer right? But because of how it was built, it's too hard to change it. We have to rebuild it. So the user feedback has helped us focus the replatform and in some cases actually shape the product that we build. But both of those are like the guiding lights to why we're choosing to approach it specifically in this order. And those are the things we're looking for value, from the fastest. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the comment on wanting to try out the new search. I'll shoot a note into the conversation for this event or something when it's fully launched, but you've probably started to use it. And I think, especially in the apps, I think you're starting to see that happen everywhere. It's gonna get better a lot faster. What essential advice do you have for marketplace startups at the MVP stage? I'm not sure I'm the best at this. I've worked in a couple marketplaces before, and only 2 of them at the MVP stage. One thing is just that that flywheel I referred to. Marketplaces are complicated with their flywheels, and you need to give it a push somewhere. Be very clear about where you want to give it a push. Where are you going to invest your effort in your marketplace to kickstart it, to really get it going? And how do you focus your efforts there? Trying to push on everything all at once is really tough. So like, is the key to your success having enough supply, and what does that drive? Is the key to your success having enough demand, and what does that give your supply side? And really trying to understand which is the weaker point that you have to apply your efforts to, I have found to be really important. Or you either prematurely scale your startup in order to do everything all at once, and that doesn't often succeed, or you haven't really figured out product market fit for either side, or you haven't figured out your true value. And it's alluring because you might even get it spinning and doing okay, but it's pretty painful when you realize like, oh, it's not really spinning on its own. I'm just inconsistently applying push to the flywheel. So one thing is limit your thrust in your experiments to places you know or think will have impact, and confirm that. I think the other thing from a marketplace business that I've learned is it's just harder than it appears almost always. And you do have to have patience, and you really need to be listening to the marketplace, not just the users. You need to understand what's happening and why it's happening to people, and what conditions or things are out of control of the individual players on the supply and demand side. And then like, what is your thing as the marketplace putting into it that's helping them? I worked on a learning product that had, basically educators and students, but we would match them. And then, they would basically go off. It's sort of like what GLG is, like professional tutoring for folks. And it worked great, but we hadn't locked down the process by which we would match and automate that, and couldn't scale it. But we were having amazing success for the educators and the learners, and we kept focusing on that and doubling down on it. But ultimately, we couldn't create a sustainable business because we didn't understand the dynamics of that whole network, and we didn't focus on the value that the product gave versus the value we were creating simply by existing. So just, cautionary, I'd say just really focus on that understanding your flywheel and your product's value in it, and then really pushing on however you provide the most value to get that thing turning. And then hopefully it starts to spin on its own. I don't know if I have good advice. Someone asked, what's your single advice to product managers trying to land a job in this cutthroat market? I don't know if I have single advice. It's really hard. There's a lot of talented people, and because of that, I think people are able to look for a job applicant who is very specifically in what exactly they want and has the exact qualities that they want. I have found the most luck trying to make sure, much like a product, you're clear on what it is you bring to places, and then understanding what the market, that job, wants of you, and being very honest in the assessment of, can you deliver for them what they need? And if you can, then it's just about creating the pitch that's right for that person and getting your foot in the door. And sometimes you can't get your foot in the door. They won't look at your resume. You don't know anybody there. It's really hard. And that part, that's a bit of luck. Sometimes it's a great cover letter, a really funny blog post, someone just go on LinkedIn and find someone who knows and can introduce you. Sometimes that's it. But really, if you're clear about why you're right for it, even if you don't look right on your resume, that's the thing you've got to get. If your CV isn't perfect for what they want, but you understand why you'd be better than anybody, and you can sell that genuinely and authentically, go down that road. And then number one, they'll hear you above the noise. And number two, if you land there, you'll actually be happier there. it is very easy, and sometimes you don't have the luxury of being picky about the job, and I completely understand that. I have taken 2 jobs in my career I just took because I needed the job, and they both didn't end fantastically, but they served what I needed, which was the job. So by all means do that. But most of the time I've been fortunate enough to at least think about who I want to go to, and it really does help make it, you perform better, you enjoy it more. So if you can, just really think about what you offer and what you want to offer, and then find the place that you can get, cut above the noise.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel.
Sure.
I suggest we end the streaming part of our event and that we continue our discussions on Zoom during the networking session.